Hello and welcome to the Civils Times. Today we'll discuss the editorials of 12th February 2019. These are the articles we are covering today. The first article from the Hindu is Everyone is Afraid of Data. Now the context for this article would be the government's refusal to release the periodic labor force survey, which had highlighted the decline in the employment levels from 2011-12 to 2016-17. Also, the resignation of members from the National Statistical Commission, and these two members who had resigned, these were the non-official members. So this is the context of the article, and here the author is basically saying that the fear of the government that the data which is being released shall be misrepresented in the media leads them to ultimately not release the data. However, that is a wrong step to take on part of the government. Now, she talks about five trends. There are five trends that have been observed in the past history. First, the suppression of results seems to be a problem that is common to all political parties, and it is not, as certain sections of the media are saying, that the data is being suppressed by the BJP, which is leading to destruction of the independence or the autonomy of India's institutions. So the author is saying that the suppression of the results seems to be a problem that is common to all the political parties. Census 2011 had showed that there was a differential population growth between the Hindus and the Muslims, and due to fear of not wanting to incite communal passions, the government had delayed the release of that data. Similarly, she points out another case of UNICEF rapid survey on children in 2013-14. Now, this survey had probably shown Gujarat in a poor light, therefore, this data was never released by the government. Now, second trend. This was your first trend, that suppression of data is basically a common problem to all. Therefore, we'll just write down all the trends here. The five trends. Suppression of data is common to all political parties and not the trait of some particular political party, as media seems to be highlighting. Second, the fear of having statistical reports misquoted is legitimate. Statistics that don't always lend themselves to rapid unpacking into sound bites and headlines are easily misrepresented. And the third, once the reports are the statistics are misrepresentative and are used as a manipulative tool by the media to shape the public opinion. This is what the author is saying in this article. The third trend that has been observed is that it is impossible to bottle up the genie once the data are collected and prepared. It cannot be. That is basically she's saying that once the data has been prepared and collected, it cannot be suppressed for long. Because if the government itself is not releasing the data, then what will happen is those who have allegedly exclusive access to this data will do the function of interpreting that data whichever way they want to the public, and that becomes a source of distortion, and it can be negative for the government as well. The fourth trend that has been observed is that sometimes leaked results create speculation that is far worse than the full disclosure would warrant. It results because The Economist cherry-picked its comparison. The Economist is a case here which had basically misrepresented the rapid survey on children which had been carried out by UNICEF. So the author is basically pointing out that if the results are not fully released by the government, then there is a chance that this data can be cherry-picked by sections of the media for comparisons. Many aspects of the data that has been left out, and only those data that are picked up can shape into finally attractive headlines. The fifth trend that has been observed, the employment picture. The statistics often deal with complicated reality and require thoughtful analysis instead of bare bones reporting contained in typical government reports. The headline in Business Standard on February 3rd based on the lead PLFS, which is your periodic labor force survey report, claimed that more than half the population is out of employment or out of the labor force. Now, currently, according to this, there's a need for full disclosure of data to know the exact situation or the real situation, whether the report is talking about the entire population or those that has been dominated by women. The author is saying, basically, we'll discuss this trend again. This is very much a continuation of the trend between 2004-5 to 2011-12, as had been documented by the NSS, which is your National Sample Survey, under a different government. Now, between 2004 and 5 to 2011-12, the work participation rates for rural women of working ages fell from 57 to 43. However, much of this decline was in modern women working on family farms and family businesses, which fell from 42 to 27. And the decline in wage work was much smaller, from 24 to 21. If lower engagement of women with the family-based activities such as farming, rearing livestock, or engaging in petty businesses drives a decline, we may need to look at the declining farm sizes and the increasing mechanization as the drivers of the decline. So first of all, the author is saying that the data, as the Business Standard had reported, which the PLFS report had claimed, according to Business Standard, that more than half the population of India had been driven out of labor force. Now, the author is speculating or saying that whether it was the entire population of India or in particular women drove this data. That is, the employment was in the entire population of women. Because according to the author, between 2004 and 5 and 11-12, the decline in women working on a family farm or in a family business was from 42 to 47. That is, much of this decline of PLFS was driven by women rather than this. Moreover, further, she says that the decline in the participation of women in labor force is not to be attributed to the government, rather it is to the declining farm sizes and the increasing mechanization, which is pushing women out of the workforce. Further, the urban comparison between the National Sample Survey and the Periodic Labor Force Survey requires caution, particularly for unemployment figures, whereas the NSS contains independent cross-sectional samples for each sub-round, the PLFS includes a panel component in the same panel component in urban areas where the same household are reviewed or re-interviewed every quarter. Since it would be easier to find the unemployed rather than the employed for interview, attrition adjustment is necessary. So how do we get out of this vicious cycle where fear of misrepresentation leads to suppression of data? Now here the author says that the only solution to this problem, that misrepresentation of data does not create a fear in the government that which in consequence leads to suppression of data. The only solution to this issue is to recognize that we need more openness about data, coupled with deeper analysis, which will allow us to draw informed and balanced conclusion. The onus for this query lies with the government. Moreover, the net should be spread wider. Understaffed and underfunded statistical services cannot possibly have sufficient domain expertise to undertake substantially or substantively informed analysis in all the areas which the statistical data are required. A better way of building a robust data infrastructure may be to ensure that each major data collection activity is augmented by analytical component led by domain experts. The next article, time to raise the bar. Now here the context of this article is basically post-retirement government appointments which are basically an infliction which can result into destruction of the independence of the Indian judiciary. So the case here, the background here is Justice A.K. Sikri, a well-regarded judge of the Supreme Court of India, found himself in the eye of storm arising from accepting a post offered last year by the government while being a judge of the court. By later turning down, he basically substantially redeemed the judiciary's and his own honor. Now, the author moves to the case of Justice M.C. Chagla. Now, both M.C. Chagla as well as M.C. Setalvad were members of the First Law Commission, and as members, they had categorically denounced the proclivity of the judges accepting post-retirement jobs sponsored by governments and called for an end to it. Now, uh, further, in a study, the VD Center for Legal Policy has pointed out that as many as 70 out of 100 Supreme Court judges have taken up assignments in either NHRC, which is the National Human Rights Commission, NCDRC, Armed Forces Tribunal, etc. In the Roger Matthew versus South Indian Bank, which is currently going on, the tribunalization of the judiciary and its challenge to the independence of judiciary. The senior counsel has said the tribunal should not be a haven for retired persons, and appointment process should not result in decisions being influenced if the government is itself a litigant as well as the appointment authority at the same time. Now, there are certain arguments which the author points out or notes in favor of acceptance of post-retirement government jobs. The author says that the justices who have for long worked in the judiciary gain valuable experience as well as insights that competent and honest judges acquire during their period of service, and this cannot be wasted after the retirement. Moreover, unlike abroad, a judge of the higher judiciary in India retires at a comparatively young age and has many years of productive work left with him. However, he points out also certain arguments against the acceptance of government jobs post-retirement. He says the Law Commission had, after careful consideration, said that accepting government jobs or appointments after retirement could result in affecting the independence of the Indian judiciary. Now, what does the author propose as a solution to all this problem? The author says that a viable option would be to expeditiously establish a commission through a legislation made up of majority, if not exclusively, of retired judges to make appointments of competent retired judges to tribunals and the judicial bodies. That is, a commission should be set up constituting majority of the retired judges, not exclusively, to make appointments of competent and retired judges to the tribunals or the judicial bodies. Further, he said if the parliament is reluctant to legislate such a statute, what the judiciary can do is judiciary can step in to fill that void, as it had done in Vishaka case, where the Supreme Court had laid down the guidelines to deal with sexual harassment in workplaces until the law was passed by Parliament. Similarly, to form the commission, to set up the commission, the Supreme Court can step in, fill the void because of the legislature, because of delay or reluctance due to on part of the legislature, and not legislate, but create certain guidelines for the formation and the process of functioning of the commission, which shall allot appointments to competent retired judges to tribunals and the judicial bodies. Hope this article is clear. Moving on, the state of states. Now, in this case, basically the author is talking about the SDG India Index, which had been released by Niti Aayog last year. Now, Niti Aayog had developed this SDG India Index. What it does is, it ranks the states and the union territories of India based on their performance on 62 parameters. While there are no states with 100 score achievers. Now this index basically categorizes the states and union territories into 4 categories. It's mentioned here. You have your achievers, who are those with a score of 100. You have front runners, you have performers, and you have aspirants. Now, achievers are those states which have already accomplished the set target. The front runners are those that are very close to realizing it. Now, although the classification sounds like an appropriate thing to do, see, what the author is doing is basically, he is pointing out the lacuna in your SDG index. Now, he provides a lot of data through which we will not be going, but you are free to go through them. We'll just mention what the issues the author is pointing out. The author says, just a second. See, the author is basically saying that there is an arbitrariness in the exercise, in the sense that in a unitary range, states with scores till the midpoint are categorized as aspirants. A cluster of states in a close range of the progress are termed as performers. Now you can see the scores here. This is your map of India, and this is your score. This is your linear range from 0 to 100. There are no achievers. Achievers meaning 100. If a score is 100, it means achiever, meaning that it has achieved the national target set for 2030, which is your deadline for achieving your sustainable development goals. Now you can see that UP is lagging far behind with a score much less than 49. The India's national score is 57. Bihar, Assam and UP are laggards, or in the terms of the SDG index, these are aspirants, and they have performed, or they need to perform much more. This says, well, there are no states with 100 score achievers. Himachal Pradesh, Kerala and Tamil Nadu are forerunners. Forerunners meaning they have performed close to the national goals. Goa, Gujarat, Karnataka are top performers in the index. Assam, Bihar and UP are aspirants with scores less than 49. Now, why the index is needed? The index is needed to support the states and the union territories to benchmark their progress. It helps the states and the UTs to identify the priority areas. It highlights the data gaps related across sustainable development goals. And what are the limitations? 4 goals have been excluded. So, see, now the SDG India index is carried out for only 13 goals out of the 17 goals which are provided under SDG. The reason being, the data for these 4 goals that have been excluded in the index were not sufficient. Further, indicators emerging from the state schemes are not included. These are the drawbacks. Now, the author says the problem of averaging. See, we won't go into unnecessary details in this article. The process of aggregation adopted presents summary. The geometric he rather proposes a solution. This is a very technical article. There is not much necessity to go into it. Plus, it is overcritical. And we all know that the Hindu is a very leftist newspaper. It is overcritical or over skeptical of the government of the center, and in particular the current incumbent government. The Hindu is too skeptical. Therefore, if you wish to go through this article, the technical details, you can go through it. However, it shall not be necessary from the perspective of UPSC. However, you can remember this point of the SDGs from the perspective of prelims. Now, moving on, we'll move on to the Indian Express. Now, all is not well in the court. Now, in this article, the author is basically pointing out that there are many issues with the Indian judiciary, and he lists them down. He provides 5 prominent issues which are plaguing the Indian judiciary at the moment. The first major issue, the author says, is that the idea of having CJI, which is the Chief Justice of India, as a master of roster. Now, master of roster is basically the privilege of the Chief Justice of India to allocate benches to decide or to sit on certain cases. That is, he basically decides the constitution as well as the composition of the benches that shall adjudicate on any case. Now, the author finds certain issue with this, and the previous CJI was criticized by many for the manner in which cases were allocated to judges under his watch. He says in democratic countries around the world, notably UK, Canada, Australia, the allocation of work and selection of benches is a consultative process, and therefore it develops a culture of trust. As against India, where the CJI is your master of the roster, that is, CJI single-handedly decides which bench shall handle which case. The second issue, which is plaguing the Indian judiciary, is how the appointments to and transfers within the higher judiciary continue to be made. Here, he is talking about the Indian collegium system that had developed through the third judge's case, and we are very familiar with this, so we should not be going into this. Moreover, the Indian judiciary or the Supreme Court has been pretty reluctant upon changing this collegium system. You must be knowing about the NJAC, which is the National Judicial Appointment Commission that had been proposed by the current BJP government in 2016. However, both this Act 2016, however, both the NJAC as well as the Constitutional Amendment Act, which is brought in to bring in the NJAC, were rejected and declared unconstitutional and void by the Supreme Court. So you can see the reluctance on the part of the Supreme Court to bring in the executive in the case of appointments and transfers within the higher judiciary, which is your high courts and Supreme Courts. However, the collegium system is very opaque and this system must undergo reform. However, there has been no progress on this front so far. Even here the author is suggesting that even if the judiciary is not inclined to revise its position on the appointment process, it could at least improve slightly the memorandum of procedure for making judicial appointments. Now, the third issue that plagues the Supreme Court, the judiciary, is the fascination of the Supreme Court for the sealed cover as means of receiving information about cases, having used it in 3 highly documented litigations in the past few months. Now, this is completely against the idea of open and transparent justice. Unfortunately, our judiciary is not only opaque in its own working, but is also becoming partial to opacity in its public function. Jurisprudence clearly shows that such secretive information should be resorted to only in exceptional cases. Now, the fourth issue here the author is pointing out is about post-retirement appointments, as we had discussed in the first article today, first or the second article today. Kindly go through it from the Hindu. And the fifth issue the author is pointing out is that the appeal made to the Supreme Court by itself against the order of Delhi High Court on the applicability of the RTI to the judiciary. The Delhi High Court judgment has been stayed and the case has been languishing in the court for a decade now. Closure on this account is more urgently needed than ever, especially in the context of issues of transparency in the judiciary. So these were the 5 issues that are plaguing the Indian judiciary in the opinion of the author. This article is pretty straightforward. You can go through the details yourself. What I'm doing is basically providing a gist of it, the entire article, so that makes reading for you very lucid. Further, you just remember this, that if before you visit our lectures, before you visit these lectures, please, it's a request, it's a sincere request, and if you're serious about UPSC, you must read the article yourself first from either the newspaper or the PPT that we provide, and only then come and view this lecture. And we shall be trying to upload these lectures as soon as possible every day. Now, another point, editorials must be read in the spirit of UPSC rather than getting influenced by them. We all know that the Hindu and most of these authors are leftist in the sense that they are communist, and since the current government is slightly right-wing, or it is right-wing basically, therefore the leftists are anti to this, and hence the articles or the editorials we read shall be highly opinionated, and therefore it is your duty to extract 2 to 3 points out of every editorial which shall serve you in both essay as well as mains. And remember, in both the essay or the mains, since these are subjective, you cannot be overcritical of the government. You must maintain a neutral stand, and you cannot afford to be over skeptical or overcritical of the government, as these authors in these editorials of Hindu in particular are. Now, this is a dialogue and opportunity. Now, this is in pertaining to the US Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross's visit on 14 January with the Indian Minister Suresh Prabhu. Now, we had discussed this article yesterday. The context of this article is the worsening trade ties, the worsening India-US trade ties, and there is a further threat that US could be withdrawing the GSP, which is your global generalized system of preferences for India, which had been extended to India in 1976, and India had been enjoying the favors of free trade under this. Now, what is generalized system of preferences? We had discussed this yesterday. This is basically that whenever US imports any products from India, They are not charged. The USA does not charge any tariffs on goods which are goods or services which are coming from India. But so is not the case for the goods which are imported from US by India. That is, India can export to US duty free. That is basically the meaning of GSP. This status can be withdrawn by the US government because of shift. Donald Trump's shift from what America had always championed, free trade, to fair trade. Because USA has been ripped off by many nations, this is true on Donald Trump's part and America's part. In America's perspective, it is very true that they must be carrying out fair trade rather than free trade, because in the name of free trade, USA has been ripped off by countries such as China, Japan, and even India. Now, what the author is saying is, he points out certain points. You can read this article. It's a pretty straightforward article. The first is to recognize the value of the trade relationship between the two countries. And the second is that both the countries need to be sensitive to the domestic political, because India is heading into an election mode. And there is no need, as the author says, for USA to embarrass Prime Minister Modi. He further says that the Indian PMs, starting from Atal Bihari Vajpayee, have played a critical role by defying the conventional bureaucratic wisdom, and they have rather defying the conventional bureaucratic wisdom. These prime ministers, starting from Atal Bihari Vajpayee, have forged a strong relationship with the United States, which had traditionally been closer to Pakistan rather than India. Finally, the secret to successful engagement with the US involves two simple propositions: never stop negotiating and keep making deals, small or big. The author says that continuous forward movement, however slow and incremental, is always critical for a country such as USA. Unlike security issues, trade is not a zero sum game deal. Zero sum game basically means that whatever win or loss that you make will be exactly balanced by the losses or the wins made by your opponent. That is, this victory on your part shall be balanced by a loss on the part of the other person in the game, or a loss on your part shall be balanced exactly by a victory on the part of the other person who is a participant in the game. So, unlike security issues, trade is not a zero sum game and should be more amenable to deal making. That is, there is a lot of flexibility that is offered in trade, which can be made use on both part by India and US, unlike security issues. Now that shall all be for today. Thank you and have a very good day.